Hi everyone, my name is Bree with the Center For Hyperhidrosis, and I'm here today with Kayla. Kayla, if you want to just introduce yourself and talk about your initial hyperhidrosis experience, how you first noticed that you had it, that would be great.
Perfect. Hey, everyone. As Bree mentioned, my name is Kayla. So I live in Massachusetts, and I learned that I had hyperhidrosis at a pretty young age. I was in elementary school, I would say, when I first realized it. I think I knew that I had it, and maybe some other people kind of had caught on and just thought it was a little weird. But my first like real experience of, oh God, what is this thing was I had a teacher who actually made me retake a test because all of my answers were like sweaty on the piece of paper. And obviously I was in elementary school, so I was writing with the pencil, and it was just like the more I wrote, the more I ripped the paper. I remember like I was a super overachiever, really good kid, and like hated to like be bad. So I went home and told my mom what had happened, and my mom was like, "Not today." My mom went to the school and spoke with the teacher, and then, obviously they felt super bad about it. I think initially they thought that I had like wet the paper or something. She didn't know what it was, which was super common with hyperhidrosis. Like no one would understand it ever. But yeah, that was my first experience with it. So dates back a while ago, and it was what it was, I guess.
Right. So in school, really, which I feel like that's sort of the story with a lot of patients because that's your first time really where you're like hand on paper writing. And whether you played a sport or not, everybody has that same experience where they've had to write on a paper before. And it's like, oh, I don't think anybody else's paper is getting wet from writing on it. So what on earth is happening?
And I remember like at a super young age already being hyper conscious of it and like doing this with my sleeve. And I'd wear even so, first of all, I'd be like super sweaty. And then I would always wear long sleeves or sweatshirts because I wanted like something to absorb. And then I would say, like, when I got to middle school, because I was so aware of it, I would actually bring like a little hand towel everywhere I went and have like tissues and napkins. And yeah, I would just like bring my little safety of things, but honestly, it didn't really help. And then when I got older to when I could like drink iced coffee, I would just bring an iced coffee everywhere I went and been like, oh, so sorry about the condensation. Really
Coffee.
went everywhere.
Oh my gosh, I would do the same thing. And props to you for managing it with a towel. Like, you know what? It's going to make me more comfortable to have a towel with me. My mom would always try to get me to carry one. She would be like, just take a towel with you. And I'm like, I'm not carrying a towel around school. And so I wish now, looking back, that I would have just allowed myself to be more comfortable and like in my own skin, just be able to manage it more. But my safety blanket was just having a sweatshirt everywhere. Like, even if it was hot outside, I had a sweatshirt with me. Even if I didn't have it on, I had it so I could lay it over the desk and like write on it. It's insane.
Yeah. And honestly, when I was in middle school, I remember that I was wearing, God, a Hollister track jacket, which used to be so cool. And I had like ginormous armpit sweat stains. And the boys were like, ew, why are you so sweaty? And it was such a thing. So then around that age, I started wearing like a lot of white or a lot of black. So like through high school, through college, and even now, like love wearing my black. But the surgery actually corrected my armpit sweat, which is amazing. And even when I work out, if I'm doing like a crazy workout, it's still like normal, should sweat. It's like normal armpit sweat, not like down to here where it would be like so obvious and you couldn't hide it. And when I would wear sweatshirts, I would sweat through the sweatshirt. I remember I had this one favorite Abercrombie and Fitch. It was gray with white letters. Gray was the worst color because it'd be like, everyone's like, why is she sweating all the time? I'm like, I don't know, just happy to be here and explain it.
Harder than everyone else. Yeah. It just it's insane. And those memories are so engraved in your brain, even now when like neither of us have to deal with it anymore, but it's still traumatizing thinking
Oh
back
my God.
on all of those moments. Like the fact that you could even recall the specific sweatshirt, like that says so much about how it takes such a toll on your life.
And even like, so obviously hyperhidrosis is so extreme. It's hands are drip sweating for no reason. But and now that I've had the surgery, sometimes my hands will get clammy. That's totally normal, especially like, if I have a big meeting that I'm preparing for, or just like normal things that would cause stress or anxiety. It's totally normal to have like some amount of sweating, but the amount of sweating that we used to have is the problem. And I feel like I see like a lot of the comments that are like, oh yeah, it's all fun and games until like you start sweating worse than you did before. And I'm like, I don't think you realize, like, I don't think there's such thing as worse than before. It was
I know.
just for no reason.
Exactly. And I'm glad you brought up the fact that your hands do still sweat, or I would say get clammy. That you use the perfect word for it, because I would say my hands never have sweat since surgery. Do they get clammy? Yes, they get clammy. If I'm hot or something, they'll get clammy. I notice if I'm out on a run, especially if it's in the summer where it's hot, they'll get clammy. And it's kind of funny looking back at it now, because that is what I envisioned anytime I would like not willingly share, oh yeah, my hands are sweaty, and they would respond with, my hands sweat too. That is what I envisioned. Like
And it's
slight clamminess that everyone.
totally different. Oh yeah, no. And like my hands, I would say, are dry 99% of the time. My hands before surgery would be sweating 99% of the time. Like that 1% that my hands weren't sweaty, I'd be like, what did I do different? Like, did I like use the sanitizer have a lot of alcohol and it was so strong that I didn't sweat? Like, there was no rhyme or reason for how much I used to sweat. Now I'm like, okay, big meeting, a little anxious, or when, as you said, when it's hot or humid, it's totally normal to sweat in those situations. Like, that is my dream.
Just to sweat normally. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and I feel like that's such a conversation about this surgery too. Like a lot of people, when I tell them that I had this, who have never had hyperhidrosis, they're like, oh, that can't be good. You're supposed to sweat. Sweating is the body's reaction to X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, pump the brakes. I'm also not an idiot and suffered with this for so long and did a ton of research, like the appropriate times.
Exactly. Absolutely. And that leads me into sort of the second question, doing all of the research and everything. Obviously, most people don't go from trying nothing to having surgery. So give us sort of that timeline of when you first started looking into treatments for it, what all did you try before surgery, and why did you end up choosing to get the surgery with Dr. Basseri specifically?
All right, I'll try to keep it to like a minute because there was a lot. I would say when I was in third grade, roughly, my parents realized that something was wrong. So I had gone to see my primary care physician at the time, who then referred me to a dermatologist. So I went to like a bunch of different specialists. They did a ton of blood work. They initially thought that it could have been something with my thyroid, but I was completely overall healthy. So at that point, no one knew what this thing was, unfortunately. So, my parents kind of continued on to just keep pushing the doctor, the dermatologist, to try to find something. And I would say that around sixth grade, I tried to use topical, like aluminum something or another. It's a really strong aluminum. It's a chemical, and you put it on your skin. So I would put it on my hands and put it on my feet at bedtime. I would go to bed with bags over my hands and feet and just pray that this was going to be a miracle and work the next day. You had to try it for a prolonged period of time to see if it actually worked. But what I found was that it was literally just drying the surface of my skin, where my hands were like almost feeling like they were cut. Same with my feet, but I was still sweating. So now I just had hands and feet that hurt and sweat. So that didn't work. Continued to just like keep seeing a doctor about this to try to find something. There was nothing really at that point that they had recommended. In addition to that, when I was in high school, I did, acupuncture. That was suggested. So gave it a shot, nothing. And then when I was in college, my freshman year, I actually was on the cheerleading team, and I was pretty desperate for something that was going to work. It was a new phase in my life, college freshman, living away from home, doing this thing. And I was trying so hard to mask my hyperhidrosis that it just became such an anxiety ridden thing. And so basically, I went to my doctor. They had suggested that I take an oral medication. It's a really long name, but essentially it dries you out. And at the time, they told me I could take up to 8 pills a day. When I first started taking it, I was like, okay, up to 8 pills a day. One day I took 7 because I had like a big cheerleading competition and I didn't want to be sweaty for it. So I remember going back to my room and eating a cookie. And the cookie literally was like lodged in my mouth and throat because I had no spit. And I'm like, okay. And to tell you the honest truth, I can't even remember it working particularly well for my hands. I feel like my hands were still sweating so much. I was just like, my mouth was so dry and I couldn't even eat a cookie without nearly choking to death. So I stopped that right off the bat. I was like, okay, I'm not doing this. That was my freshman year of college. My junior year of college, I actually stayed with the same primary care physician, and she continued to like follow this journey with me because she was so intrigued, had never seen a patient where like I would sit there on like the little paper that they put on the table, and it would just be like drip sweating onto the paper, and she'd be like, Kayla, I cannot even understand this. Like she was so intrigued by it, but she helped me to find a medical doctor that would do Botox of my hands. So honestly, I did not do much research on that before doing it. Again, I was in college, just like desperate for
Yeah.
relief. No, it was the most painful thing that I have ever done in my life. I had to get 40 injections in each hand, which, if like your hands are super sensitive, but you don't really think of that. Every injection, I just remember being like cringing and out PTSD till this day. And so I was told that that could last 6 to 12 months for my hands. I did not do it on my armpits. I did not do it on my feet because it was horrendous. And I kid you not, my hands were still sweating, not clammy. They were still sweating less than usual for about a couple weeks. And at that point, I was like, there is no way that I'm going to put myself through that pain because I have this thing. Like it was not worth it. It hurt so bad. And it was like, if it was 6 months of full relief, maybe I would be crazy enough to do it because I hated sweating so much. But for a couple of weeks and to still have like super sweaty episodes, nope. So that was towards the end of my college career. And then I started working right away in the business field. So very much if you and I was in a lot of meetings where I was meeting new people, and like you are taught from day one that first of all, you're a woman in a man's world. So, girl, if you are going to show up, you better have a firm handshake and you better make it count. So, I remember like bracing myself for every single meeting when it was a new person, and I would be like, Lord, like, how am I going to do it? I don't know. I'd be like, please, just like, I would go to the bathroom, I'd wash my hands before instant sweat. So, that's like the iced coffee trick. I would bring my iced coffee and I would like hold it, and then I'd like wipe my hand and be like, oh, I'm so sorry, the condensation. So nice to meet you. And that would like carry on of my day. The problem though was I would be in these meetings for hours on end, and you have to type or you have to write, and like things would be getting wet around me. And I just remember like my anxiety would be so heightened the entire time because I didn't want people to notice. And there were a few times where I had someone notice and they'd be like, oh, you're like really sweaty, or are you feeling okay, or say something like that. And sometimes I would actually be like, oh no, like, oh, I'm just feeling a little hot, or like this room is tiny, I'm a little claustrophobic, like make something up because I was so embarrassed. Or if I was more comfortable and had already like built a rapport with the person, I'd be like, okay, well, I have this thing called hyperhidrosis. It's excessive sweating. And I'd like try to give like a little scientific definition of it. And then I would crack a joke, which was so bad. I would just be like, but at the end of the day, I'm so thankful that I have hands, which is like so horrible. I would just like say these things because I did not know for the life of me how to explain this. And it's not like no one knows what it is. So they're just like, why are they sweating? And there's no good answer.
It is so insane. And sometimes I put myself in the shoes of somebody who's never seen this before. Could you imagine? this person's hands are just profusely sweating. And some of the videos that we've posted sharing, patients' hands that are sweating videos, we've had comments from people that clearly don't have hyperhidrosis. And they're like, basically saying that we're like putting water on their hands and filming these videos. And it's like, no, I wish this was a real video a patient sent to us of their hand dripping sweat. We know it sounds crazy. That's why there's a surgery for it. And it's a whole thing. And people don't talk about it.
Well, so yeah, that is such a good point because I feel like I was always so private about it. And even leading up to my surgery, I flew from Massachusetts to California. Crazy trip. My mom came with me. And I remember I hadn't really told too many people that I was going to go because not that many people knew that I suffered from hyperhidrosis. But I was so happy with the results that I posted a little bit about my trip and what I went do. And I had so many people reaching out to me, first of all, saying that they had no idea that I had this thing. And then, like, they could not believe how sweaty the before picture was, or like the video of when I put lotion on and my hands don't instantly sweat. But then I also had friends who, like, I know they were just joking, but like they sent me videos of themselves like on the Peloton being like, "Do I qualify for the surgery?" And it's like, no, that's not a funny joke because the surgery is for people who are sweating the same way you're sweating after a 60-minute intensive workout for no reason, right? And I get it. It's like trying to be light and keep it light, but it's a really serious thing. And I feel for people because after I had the surgery, I remember I ran into one person in particular and we worked together and he was very sweaty and his hands, and I went to shake his hand because I was no longer like, now I'm like, nice to meet you. We've already met before. I'm like, well, nice to meet you again. Oh. And I felt so bad because I saw his like hesitance and then the hand wipe. And
that is like a feeling that nobody else understands. Like you feel it in your soul, that like heart sinking. And I get it on both sides now because I'm in the same position where I'm like, I want to just shake everybody's hands because my hands are dry and I can finally do it. And it's so exciting. But I do hesitate now just because I'm like, what if they have hyperhidrosis? Like, you never know. It's so interesting.
It's wild what we went through, but are no longer going through.
So you tried Botox, yep. Miserable, didn't work. And where were you at after that?
At that point, when the Botox did not work, I just threw my hands up in the air and was like, you know what? This is my destiny. It is what it is. I'm going to live with this. Fortunately, I had found my life partner, happy, and I kind of joke with my husband because now I'm much more touchy-feely. I'm like, let's hold hands. I would be like, don't even touch my hand. Or, we were together for many years and he knew I had this thing. And obviously, like, people don't care when they love you. It's fine. But anytime we would go to a fancy event, I would have him lotion my legs because I could not do it. And now I lotion my own legs and I'm like, kind of miss when like someone else would do that for me. I just show up and be like, lotion my legs. Now I have no excuse. But so, yeah, I was like, this is my life. And then there were a couple things that had happened. One of my children was like, I remember hugging her in the morning and my hands were sweaty for no reason. And she was just like, Mom, don't touch me. Your hands are wet. And I was like, she doesn't understand. She has no idea. And that's such a genuine, natural response because if you're sleeping and someone like reaches over and touches you with cold, wet hands, because that was the other thing, my hands would be cold and clammy. So it would like, it wasn't cool. And I remember being like, oh, wow, that's really crappy, but I can't blame her for feeling that way. And just carried on for years. And then one day I'll never forget it. I was at a friend's wedding in New York, getting my drink on. It was open bar. And I see this ad or like this video of Center For Hyperhidrosis. And I'm like, why is my phone always listening to me? Like, how do they know that I'm so sweaty? And I start scrolling and I'm like, I don't know what these people are doing, but I'm signing myself up. So I was feeling very courageous, sent a message to the center, like, telling them my whole life story about how I had struggled with this since elementary school. They probably got it on Monday morning and were like, all right, we're going to talk to her. I think Sabrina reached out at the time. And then, I just started asking questions. And at first it did not feel real. it was kind of like this fantasy thing, right? Like, oh, there's this Center for Hyperhidrosis in California. But in my mind, I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not just going to up and leave my family to go do this thing that I know nothing about. But I spoke with, I kind of forget the order of it. I spoke with Sabrina initially, and then I believe you and I spoke, Bree. Then I spoke to Dr. Basseri, and everything was just like sounding all too good to be true. But I came with my list of questions because I was like, I didn't know what to expect. And then I spoke with Alberto, and I feel like he was the one that essentially convinced me that I should do this, because I remember being skittish because there was so many positive reviews. So I'm like, that's not common. I remember like looking for all this stuff and I couldn't find it. So at that point I said, you know what? I'm going to do this. And I did it. And I have zero regrets. And I know there are people who say like, oh God, it could be the honeymoon phase and you're going to just sweat even more at some point. But for me, I was sweating so much that I go back to that. Well, then, hey, I've had a year now. My surgery was last September. So a little over a year of like that lack of anxiety feeling and not drip sweating for no reason. And I should say that actually I did not have, what's the foot one? ELS?
ELS, yeah. I was going to ask you, just for anybody who's watching, the ETS procedure, which is for the hands plus or minus the underarms, meaning you don't have to get your underarms done if they don't bother you, but if they do, you can. There is a chance that the feet will improve with that surgery. And it's kind of like a coin toss. Some patients feet improve, some don't. So yeah, if you would like to share your experience with that, I would love to hear.
Yeah. And I would also say that Dr. Basseri was so upfront with like the statistics on that. Obviously, he's brilliant at what he does. I went into my ETS surgery not expecting my feet to get any better. And just like my feet were super sweaty before surgery. And they actually have improved. I would say that they still are sweaty. Sometimes they'll still, like, especially in the heat. But I feel like that's more normal. But it's not something at this point in my life, I'm not going to sign myself up for that surgery because of how much it's improved. I remember before my surgery, I loved to wear heels and I would always have like blisters on my feet because of the frictioning, because of how sweaty my feet would be. And I have not had that in a year. So for me, I'm happy with it. If it gets worse, then maybe, because I'm so spoiled with my dry hands, but my feet have certainly improved. And honestly, I also think while hyperhidrosis is not like, it's not a mental thing, but I would say that as soon as my hands used to start sweating, it would just make me so anxious to my core that I feel like everything else would just start sweating too. Because at that point, can't really explain it. That at that point, then it would become an anxiety thing. Like it wouldn't be triggered.
Exactly. No, you said that perfectly. And I think that is one of the aspects of hyperhidrosis that is so misunderstood or just confusing, even to people that have it, because they are like, well, I don't have anxiety, or I may not be in an anxious situation, but my hands are sweating. Like I can be sitting there in the air conditioning watching TV, my hands are sweating. But those two things go hand in hand, especially if you are in a social situation and your hands start sweating. Even if you weren't nervous at all in this social situation, but now your hands are sweating, then you're like, oh my gosh, so who's going to see my hands? And that makes you anxious, which makes the sweating worse. And it's like they go hand in hand together. And for me, and it sounds like same for you, my hands would start sweating. That's really when my feet would start sweating. I personally didn't really, at least looking back now, I don't recall a time that just my feet were sweating and not my hands. It was either just my hands or my hands and my feet. And so my feet improved a ton after too. And really interesting just to talk with other people that had both hands and feet, obviously, that were sweaty. Crazy how it affects everyone differently.
Yeah. And I feel like it was same as you, like my hands would always be like the first thing. And then for me, I'd be like, oh no, someone is going to see that my hands are sweating. And then at that point, I kind of stopped wearing open toe shoes in certain settings because I was like, I don't even want people to see that. But then I was like, okay, these shoes are hideous. Like you finding a cute pair of flats for corporate America, good luck. Okay.
Right.
And I was like, all right, I'm either going to wear these like ridiculously ugly shoes. I'm 5 feet, by the way. So like I'm going to be the shortest person in the room and the only woman, and I'm going to be wearing hideous shoes. So like there was no good. So sometimes I'd be like, all right, I'm gonna break out the wedges and I'm just gonna deal with it. But then as soon as my hands would start sweating, like my feet would start, and then I was petrified because honestly, I feel like feet sweating is even weirder than hand sweating. So then I'd just be like, oh my God, I gotta hide my feet under my backpack or under the desk. Like, don't let anybody see anything. Oh God, it's terrifying. But
Well, I'm glad that it's gotten better for you too. It's always exciting because I tell patients now when I have that call, if they ask about the feet, I'm like, do not go into ETS expecting your feet to get better. Like, don't get your hopes up. I'm up for like starting to try to get up, and every time I'm like, nope, don't think about it. Just be grateful for the fact that your hands are going to be dry after this, and we'll take each day after that as it comes. And if my feet get better, great. If they don't, there's another surgery for that I can get. So like just focus on one thing at a time. And so I tell patients now, like, and Dr. Basseri is very upfront and honest about, like, he doesn't say, oh, you know, the chances of the feet improving are right there with the hands. Like, it's not. The chance of the feet improving is like 15% compared to, you know, there's a much larger chance that your feet are going to sweat after. So just take it as a bonus if they do get dry.
yeah. And I would say Dr. Basseri was so great even after I had surgery. I remember he, first of all, like checked in so much. The best doctor on this planet. I don't care. Like, shout out to Dr. B. Like, that guy is the ish. But so he checked in so much after my surgery. And I remember I was starting to get my hopes up because my feet were completely dry for like 2 weeks. And he was like, okay, that's great, but they might start sweating. Like, he was very much like, all right, I'm just going to bring you down to earth for a second. And he was right. Like, they did start sweating again, but again, it's improved dramatically. So yeah, as of right now, I'm not planning on the ELS surgery, but my feet did get way better.
Awesome. And that kind of leads me into the next question, which is just the surgery experience itself and life after surgery. So obviously, unfortunately, it's not just a call and go in the next day to get surgery. So you have to wait that whole process out, but it's worth it. 100%. It's worth the wait. And so actually getting to the center, you said that you flew in, obviously. So just talk a little bit about that and then the surgery process and after surgery as well.
Yeah, so I flew in on a Wednesday night, I want to say. I remember like working the full day and then flying in with the time difference. I got there late Wednesday night, drove to our hotel. That Thursday, I had my appointment with Dr. Basseri, like the pre-op, and then had surgery Friday. Was kind of down and out on Friday. It was definitely like, you know, the meds, and it was you will feel some pain and discomfort, especially in your chest. But Dr. Basseri is great at explaining all of the logistics on that. But
yeah, and can you touch on that just a little bit more? How exactly did that feel? Obviously, I always preface by saying recovery is different for everyone. Just like with any surgery, everybody's pain tolerance is different. For me, I would say it was super manageable. I felt like I had something sitting on my chest, like a heaviness on there. How would you personally describe that aspect of surgery?
yeah, so I'd say right after surgery, like, because I had surgery on the Friday, that whole Friday, I was essentially in bed sleeping. I didn't feel particularly great. You know, you have some discomfort. Obviously, you've just undergone surgery. But then that Saturday, Bree went out in California.
You were walking Malibu.
Walking around, like
the day after surgery.
Yes, like I felt like a new woman. I remember waking up and still having that discomfort in my chest for sure. But then being like, I'm going to go out and walk. And I remember we walked a ton. Maybe I overdid it slightly, but I was able to walk around and go sightseeing and go to brunch. And then I flew home that night. Right. Yes, that's right. Okay. I took the red eye. That's right. So I flew home. Oh my gosh. Wow. You have a good memory. I flew home that night and then got in Sunday at like 7 a.m. And I remember for me, I was exhausted because I had flown a red eye. I don't sleep on flights. I was very like, I would say hyper focused on like moving my legs because I was afraid of like getting a blood clot. You hear all of these like, you know, things that can
You were
happen.
just like, very, very cautious after.
Yeah. And it was a long flight. I came home with those leg circulation things. So
Yeah,
like,
watching or listening to this, the nurses go over all of that on pre-op day. It's just precautions. Like after any surgery, they just kind of like pump your legs, keep the blood flowing. It's super important for patients that are flying in. I know like I had a super long flight back to Kentucky. You had a long flight. So it's kind of like here, if you can't get up and walk around and you're going to be sitting for a long time, put these little leg things on, they pump your legs. Just
yeah. And they don't hurt. They don't hurt. Let me just like,
gosh.
they kind of look like little shin guards or like
Yeah.
sock things that just wrap around your legs. They just look funny. Again, I was like just being overly cautious. So I think I used them for like the next week, maybe. Like I just kept using it.
Yeah, using them.
Yeah, I was like, this is fine. But yeah, so I flew back and then I was working on Monday. So it was really worth it. I do remember having a couple calls with Dr. Basseri after I had gotten home where I was still feeling some pain, but I knew that that was just me overdoing it. Like I flew a red eye, I came home, I was like trying to tidy up my house, trying to get ready for work. I had a bunch of calls back to back for that first week. I probably should have taken some more time off or just like made it a priority to rest a little bit more, but I didn't think that through enough. So my suggestion is like if you can take a couple extra days off of work, just do that so you're not overextending yourself. But then after 2 weeks, I was like, oh, I had surgery. Like I would look at my little scar. The scars are, I don't even know where they are anymore. Like,
So tiny.
yeah, I remember being like, I don't even see, and even now, like when I was in a bikini, I was like, oh my God, like, wait, that's, oh, the spot. Oh my gosh. Like, it was like, I forget that I even have them. The thing that was super helpful for me was being able to talk to you and Alberto in addition to talking to Dr. Basseri, because there wasn't a ton of information online about this. And I feel like that's where a lot of people kind of like, I would tell people that I was going to do this thing and they're like, oh my God, you're flying to California to do an experimental surgery. Like, have you lost it? And like, they don't understand the extent of how much hyperhidrosis impacts your life. So that's an easy statement to make. But I remember like trying to look at statistics because I wanted to see numbers that said like, okay, this is how many of these surgeries have been done. And like that information is not out there because it's something that people are so self-conscious about. And unfortunately, it's not like, if you look up, you know, you want to get a breast augmentation, there's like hundreds of thousands of those that have been done, probably millions. And there's so much information about, you know, what can go wrong and what can go right and where to go and how to do it. It's not like that for this type of surgery. And that was my piece. Like I searched high and low to find the numbers, the statistics, and I
think
really.
Another thing to point out is the numbers specifically with the new way of doing surgery.
Yes.
Because it's such a misconception and it's all called ETS. But the way it was done in the past versus the way that Dr. Basseri does it is so different. I totally understand being in that sort of like, everything sounds so great and I talk to everybody and everything's lining up, but where from here, you know, where do I go?
And actually, I should mention that when I was younger, that was an option that was presented to my parents. And at the time, the ETS surgery that they were told about was where, you know, you're put under and they collapse one of your lung and either cut or burn. And then they like uncollapse it and collapse the other one. And my parents literally, I remember them telling me like, well, there is this other thing, but like, no, you're not doing that. We're not going to like sign our child up for this thing. Absolutely not. It sounds way too risky. It's way too scary. And so I knew that that existed, but it was never even a thought because it seemed so invasive. And then as I got older, and despite how severe my hyperhidrosis was, I would have never considered that surgery. So when I learned about like the clamping versus cutting or burning, I was like, okay, I'm not a doctor, but this sounds like it makes so much more sense. And when Dr. Basseri just like breaks it down into layman's terms, I'm like, all right, I'm following. I can understand this. And it helped me to kind of weed out some of that like negative, because there is some negative stuff on the internet about ETS surgery, but it's people who had like the burning or the collapsing and the cutting, severing. Yeah, that I think was the toughest part of it, like trying to figure out, what some of these people who are complaining on the internet had done. And it's like, unfortunately, I feel like people just like put stuff out there and they don't back it up. So like, I had this and it ruined my life. And it's like, okay, you had what? And when did you have it? And who was your doctor? And like, what surgery did you have?
And I think that really is why, as you mentioned, like being able to talk to me who had had the surgery already, being able to talk to Alberto who had had the surgery even longer than I had it, like that is so reassuring to be able to talk to somebody. And it's also like, for anybody listening, we offer those calls. We are all here to share our experience as somebody who had it. I obviously recommend both calls because Dr. Basseri can go over all of the medical side of things, answer questions from, he's the one literally operating on you. So like have that call, but then also have the call with a patient educator who you can be like just sharing stories back and forth of how hyperhidrosis took such a toll on you. And you can ask them how recovery was. Like those two calls go hand in hand, and you should pretty much get every single question that you have covered between Dr. Basseri and a patient educator.
Yeah, and I forget, Alberto had his surgery, what, 3 or 4 years ago now?
Probably been 4 years now.
Yeah, so he, to me, was like my decision maker. Because when I spoke with you, I think you had been
here, maybe.
Yeah, so it's like, okay, maybe it's still like rainbows. Yeah. Then Alberto was like, you have to do this. Oh my God, my life is so much better. And he like gave me like the full chronology. And I was just like, Alberto, I don't know you, but I feel this. And like, we just, he phenomenal human. And obviously Diane holds such a special place in my heart too, because we had surgery the same day. But yeah.
It's just seriously like, it's amazing. It literally is like, you feel like it's too good to be true, but it's true. Like it's crazy. It leaves me speechless still.
Honestly, I feel like people who have hyperhidrosis, once they get the surgery, and like, I'm not just saying it because I had the surgery and this is how I feel like you have such an appreciation for, after the surgery, for every little thing that you do. Like you can drive without your hands like sliding all over the wheel, and like you just feel safer. You can do your makeup without like needing to keep drying your hands. You could do your hair without you could do your own lotion on your legs. Like you can touch people. Like
everything.
It impacted so many facets of our everyday life. And I remember like, even like I would wake up in the morning, and I'm bad at this. Like the first thing I do when I wake up is I look at my phone and I look at like my work emails or my work messages. And I remember sometimes I'd have work messages that I'd be trying to respond to. I literally have just woken up. I could not type on my iPhone. It would look like I was intoxicated. Like the word, it would just start making words because the phone would get so wet. And trying to explain that to people, and like when I was a kid and flip phones were a thing, God, I water damaged every single phone. I felt bad for my parents because they had to keep buying me new phones. They're like, just stop. I'm like, well, Mom, I can't use gloves while I use my phone. It'd be too weird. I'd have like a rag on the side of me trying to use T9. Oh my gosh, it was a struggle. And now when I excited to like say hi to someone and it not look like home.
It is so crazy how just the little moments, and you said it so perfectly. And I know I had made a list of things I was excited for after surgery, and I've been able to check all of those little boxes, but there was one that I didn't put on there because I didn't even realize it. And it's just being able to be present in any situation that I'm in. And that's like, I always keep going back to that because I didn't even allow myself when I had hyperhidrosis to really feel how much it affected me. And I didn't know any different. So like, how could I? But after surgery, living with dry hands and being in a room with other people, I can be outgoing and I can be the one to go shake hands or give someone a hug or, just be myself and not constantly like, oh my gosh, my hands are sweating. I hope nobody notices that my hands are sweating. My hands are sweaty right now. Like, I would literally, that was my only conversation, was me to myself thinking about how sweaty my hands were. And so just that being gone, it's like a new life.
Yeah. And that's such like, it's insane to think of, but I think of being in like some like very special milestones in my life before having surgery. Like when my kids got baptized, you have to stand in the front of the church and someone has to hold the baby and someone holds the candle. And I remember the priest is like doing his thing, bless this child. Da, da, da. And I'm just like, buddy, you need to just get through this, because if I stand here longer, my feet are going to start dripping, and then my hands are going to be dripping. People that are like family is going to notice that I'm sweating all over my child. And I remember just like being in those moments and literally being like, get this done with because of this thing. And I don't remember all that was being said, and it was probably beautiful. Nope. Same thing with like my wedding, being at the church, you stand in front. God, I had a beautiful wedding. Obviously, my husband knew my hands were sweaty, but I remember like doing the rings and just being like, please just let me like give him this ring. Like, I did not want to do my own vows. I was like, nope, we are saying like what everybody else says, because I cannot be standing there and holding your hand for too long so people don't realize it. And at the end of the day, like, it is so mental, and no one was paying attention to that. But it's sad that it ruins it for the person in the situation. Like, there's nothing that I can do to get those moments back. So I don't know. And even like going to check out at a store, God, like Apple Pay is an angel, because like you don't have to give anything now. But back in the day when you had to like give your cash and if you had coins, forget about it. You're like, oh, sorry, I just like washed my hands. Like, it literally makes no sense. But I don't miss any of that. Oh my gosh. Or the paperwork, like at the doctor's office, filling out forms. I'm like, I'm sorry, here's the form.
Your form back. Let me bring it out.
We're shaking it out. They're like, why is it so wet? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. Weird. It's like I spilled something. I don't know.
Maybe the ceiling's leaking.
Take it.
Oh my gosh. And then I just have a couple more questions for you. Obviously, you already know compensatory sweating is the number one question, reasonably so, especially people look stuff up online and read stories about it. And they're like, well, I don't want to just be sitting here and my hands are dry, but now my back is dripping sweat and I'm sitting here. So just talk about your experience with compensatory sweating.
For me, my compensatory sweating is behind my knees or on my lower back. I think it can be like on your belly. Like, there's other places where it is. It's totally manageable, and typically only happens if I'm working out or something. So like if I'm working out, my lower back might get a little sweatier than usual. Or if I'm sitting on like a leather chair and it's 100 degrees or it's 90 degrees, I might feel more sweating on the back of my knees, but it's nothing compared to the way that my hands used to sweat. It's usually just like the lower back, like if it was going to show that I was sweating, it would just be like a line.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like when I had hyperhidrosis, and even like with my armpits, when they would sweat, it would be like from here to here, big sweat stain. And like, your hands, I would always like rub it on my jeans or like just, wherever.
If you have questions on that, call and talk to somebody. And we have multiple patients you can speak with, even if it's not a patient educator. So reach out and talk to someone and feel free to ask those questions. How is life without hyperhidrosis? What have been some of the most exciting things that you've done? Any specific moments, or do you just feel like more confident in your day-to-day life? Talk about that.
Yeah, I feel like it's just a new level of confidence, which is so horrible to even say. Even when I had hyperhidrosis, I was always very much an extrovert and like loved people and loved to chat. And it was like this thing would just impact me. So I was still very bubbly and like loved everyone. But now I am like, bam, like the world was not ready for this. And I'm like, okay, Kayla, tone it down a notch. Because now I feel like I have even more confidence than before, which is wild. But then also I'm so just happy. Like, I'm not like worried. I'm not in this like constant anxious state. And I'm like, I did have a career change as well. So I was like, I'm trying to pinpoint what has like brought this like level of happiness and lack of anxiety to my life. And I honestly feel like it's, a new job plus this, like both things happened around the same time. And it's just like a new me. So like personally, amazing. Like life is just so much better. My quality of life is so much better. And like shout out to my nurse practitioner who I came to with this like thing. And I was like, hey, Allison, I want to have this surgery. And she was like, okay, you're a smart girl. Like tell me about it. And I gave her some of the details, and her exact words were like, okay, you don't need to live your life in this like constant anxiety state for this thing. Is this going to make your quality of life better? And I was like, yes. And she was like, I'm signing the paper right now. Like, let's do your EKG. And like, honestly, the fact that she supported it and understood like
And listen to you.
the mental health side of it as well is just like so amazing. Cause I feel like most people were like, kind of weird. Don't do this experimental thing, even if they're medical professions. Cause they're like, okay, what's the big deal? Your hands just sweat, Kayla. Like, don't make it a thing. But I take like now, oh God, like I love wearing super cute shoes, and I would always buy them and I'd wear them for like date night. Cause obviously my husband knew that my feet sweat. So it was fine. But now I like love wearing all of my cute outfits with my cute shoes to work. Like I would always be so self-conscious of like meeting my children's teachers, and you have to handshake, and it's just a weird thing to explain. But now I'm so much more present, and like it's like I love going to events, and I'm not like nervous like, oh my God, someone's going to notice my hands are sweating. It's just such a great feeling. And after the surgery, I actually signed up to be the soccer coach for one of my daughter's teams, and like talking to the parents, I'm like confident. I'm not like, I would just be nervous that they were going to see my hands. So I would have never done that. And like now I'm coaching, I'm doing all these things. I'm so much more present, like making friends everywhere I go, love shaking hands. Actually had a wedding a couple weeks ago, and we were at church, and I was sitting on the side of my mom and my brother's girlfriend. And, everyone's like, doing peace be with you. And normally I'd be like, Mom, like, give me a kiss. I'm not touching nobody's hand. And I literally was like, bam, bam, peace be with you. Like, peace, everybody. And my mom was like, oh my God, they're so dry. We like had a moment at church. And I was like, oh God, this is so crazy to think of. Like, and, Catholic. So I went to church for all those years to do, my confirmation. And, you're a kid and you're sitting with your classmates and you pray and you're supposed to hold hands when you're doing the Our Father. And I'd be like, God, no, not the Our Father. And I'd be like, please, like, God, they're going to know. And it's like dripping down my arm. And I'm like, oh, they know. And now I'm like, Our Father.
My body, hold my hand.
I'm literally like leaning out of the pew to reach the person's hand across. No, it's so insane. And like, yeah, like my hands are completely dry. They used to sweat, like even on the back, they would sweat.
Yeah.
They are like,
I remember you showing me that, and I was like, Kayla.
Yeah, it would like, no, they are as dry as like dry.
It is. It's amazing.
And it's been a year. So, hey, I haven't like grown a third eye or anything yet.
Yeah. And it's been 2 for me, over 2. So I think, and Alberto's at like 4 or something now. So I think we're
so far so good.
I'm so happy for you. And I'm just so grateful that we met and we're able to create a friendship from this condition.
Seriously.
It's just amazing. And it does not surprise me at all that you have taken yourself that was already so awesome and outgoing and taken it to the next level. I just love you so much. Say one thing, like somebody's watching this who has hyperhidrosis. Likely everyone pretty much that's listening to this still has it. And they might be in that phase of, do I have the surgery? Like they're in that research period. What message would you say to them?
Yeah, my message to them would be, first of all, like do your research. You have every right to ask all of the questions. The center is here to answer those questions. So like have no fear, reach out, because this will be life-changing for you. And yeah, there's no pressure at all. If you reach out, you're not like signing your life away to do this surgery. It's very casual, and definitely speak to folks who have actually already had the surgery, because it's one thing to speak to Dr. Basseri where he can tell you about the technique and all of the science behind it. But then it's another thing to hear from people who have had the surgery and how much their lives have changed, because that's what did it for me. And then obviously like you're not alone, and it's such a weird thing to try to explain to anyone who does not have it. And it's not like, I think the thing for me that was always so hard was I didn't know anybody else that had this thing. Like people in my family had like a little bit of sweaty feet and like their hands would sometimes get clammy, but it was not the extent that I had. So, everybody would just try to give solutions like, well, just like wash your hands with really cold water. Ooh, try to use like this sanitizer. Oh, I saw this ad for, oh God, what's that deodorant?
There's a few, and none of them.
Yeah. Oh, Carpe. I don't like not shout out to Carpe. I don't know. Like they'd be like, oh, look at this thing. It works. And they'd like buy me things or they'd send me the link and I would buy a million things because I was so desperate. And it's like those things, I'm sure they actually work for people who do not have hyperhidrosis. Like that's the thing. So if those things did not work for you, you are probably an excellent candidate for this surgery. And like you don't need to just keep like putting this on the back burner because you don't want to talk about it and you don't know what it is. Like get it taken care of. Life is too short. And like that's I think what it came down to for me. I'm a very, I would say, like methodical, logical, like want all of the answers to everything. And because this again isn't a surgery that's been done a gazillion times, there isn't all of that information there. But if you can feel like you've done your research and if you've gotten your questions answered, honestly, like it's a no-brainer. You have nothing to lose unless you like if you have a pre-existing condition, hey, like
Right. And that's why like Dr. Basseri offers a free phone consultation. It's about 15 minutes long. You can literally ask him any questions you want. He's literally the one who's operating on you. He's done so many of these surgeries himself, and being able to speak with him, it's like for free. Like it's not like he's even charging to talk. You can have this call and be like, okay, not for me. He's not going to be like, well, you had a call. Like that call with him is no strings attached. It is simply educational.
And honestly, even like leading up to my surgery, so I had spoken with Dr. Basseri, I'd spoken with Alberto. I continued to do research like till the day that I went for surgery, which there was like, I think it took 6 months to actually, I had to fly out. I had to do all of these things leading up to it. So that 6-month period, even after I spoke with people, I continued to do my own research because that's the way my brain thinks. And of course, you come across these horror stories of people who had a different type of ETS surgery or, maybe had a different doctor. And so I would start to like spin myself up and I would just be like, can I please talk to Dr. Basseri? And he was so great. And he'd be like, listen, I'm not trying to convince you one way or the other, but this is because of X, Y, and Z. And like, he just like helped me to get an understanding of it because like, I'm not a doctor and you can't believe everything you read on the internet. Like, in my case, I did all my testing to make sure and it made sense and it changed my life. And like to this day, I don't often tell, like, I won't just be like, hey, by the way, I had ETS surgery. Like, I won't say that. Yeah. But when I get the chance to talk to people, like, people that I'm getting closer with or people that are meeting me for the first, after we've met and hung out a little bit, I like to just be like, hey, by the way, like I did this crazy thing in California. And they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, oh my God, let me show you pictures. Because sometimes I hear people be like, oh my God, I'm sweating so much. And I'm like, do you have hyperhidrosis? I'm like, no. I'm like, show me, where are you sweating? And they're like, oh, like my head. I'm like, yeah, it's 90 degrees and you're on a dance floor. Obviously, we're all sweating. But I love being able to show people like the before and after and then being like, feel it, feel my hand, feel how dry it is. Like, see, look, it's like so dry.
Have you met anybody after having surgery besides like anybody that the center has connected you with just in your own day-to-day life? Have you met somebody that has?
So actually I met one person at my old job and I didn't want to call attention to it because I could tell he was like very high stress over it. And I can imagine like it's hard being a woman with hyperhidrosis, but I feel like for men, might be just as hard or even worse. Yeah. Like they are expected to shake everyone's hand, not just in a business meeting. Like you meet your kid's dad or mom and you have to be like, nice to meet you. So that one person. And then I will get DMs from people who are like looking at the center and I try my best to like respond to them. A lot of times they go into like the other folder on Instagram, but I'm happy to answer people's questions and like chat because I've gotten a lot of the compensatory sweating question, like, do you have and I'm like, yeah, but nothing compared to this. And it's only when I'm hot or it's only when I'm working out. And I think that really helps people too.
I really appreciate you taking the time to do this interview.
Thanks so much, everyone, for watching. Again, my name's Kayla. If you have any questions at all, reach out to the center. They have all the resources and all the answers to your questions. And good luck. And hopefully you find something that works for you in your hyperhidrosis journey.
Thank you so much, Kayla.
Thanks, Bree.